So I think this is a big cause of anxiety and lack of satisfaction and unfulfillment that we're all feeling because we're on this mission to externally define ourselves when these are not the things that we should be defining ourselves by, and this is not actually who we are. So by chasing these external ways to, quote, prove ourselves in society and make others like us, that's not going to be the path to feeling actually fulfilled in life and actually finding ourselves or following a path that's going to bring us joy and true success and happiness. Hey everyone, welcome back to Unfulfilled. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I'm your host, Camille. If you're new here on Unfulfilled, we dive into all wellness, self-improvement related topics to inspire you to live a more fulfilling life. I'm so grateful you showed up today. Before diving into today's topic, quick fun fact, majority of listeners are actually not following or subscribed to the show on Spotify or Apple. So wherever you are listening, just take one moment to press follow or subscribe. It would mean so much to me, but also give you access to episodes every single week when they come out. Today, we're talking about breaking free from labels. So let me set the scene here. You know, when you're introducing yourself to someone new, you're at a bar or on a date, meeting a new friend, whatever the social setting you choose. So you're asking each other the classic questions of, what do you do for work? Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? Are you single in a relationship? Where do you live? It's like we have these set standards of questions that we like to ask people to get to know them. And of course, every single one of us do this. But do you notice that feeling that comes up when you're answering these questions or when you're asking these questions? You feel like you have to prove yourself, right? Like your answer is immediately being judged by that person that you're sharing them with. Like they're projecting an opinion onto you or immediately putting you in a box based on the answers to these questions, based on these facts about your life. And on the flip side, we do the exact same thing. When we ask someone else these questions, whether we realize it or not, we're immediately projecting a label onto them based on their responses. So put simply, we attach labels onto others based on their responses to these questions that we ask in conversation. But these qualities are not who we are, nor should we be defining ourselves or others by these qualities. So this is what we're going to discuss today. The labels that we use to define each other, why we do this, why we should let go of these labels, and what really defines us. So what are some of these common labels that we like to project? Number one, our job or career. Probably the most obvious one that is top of mind for a lot of us. And this is a big reason that I felt inspired to do the episode today. I honestly dread answering the question, what do you do? And it's like one of the first questions people like to ask, but I dread it because as I've spoken to in other episodes, my primary job is at a hedge fund. So it's in finance. It's a 9-to-5 corporate job. Super different from the podcast, super different from my yoga teaching. I feel like I have to say I work at a hedge fund because that's my primary form of living. It's my primary income, at least for now. But the reason I feel anxiety about this is because I don't want to be defined by working at a hedge fund. It's how I pay my rent and afford my lifestyle and is a big part of my routine going into work. But I know that when I answer the question this way, that people immediately assume that I'm a big time corporate girly, that I work these long hours, that I'm not creative or passionate about things outside of work. And so I know that I'm being labeled by my response, by my job or career. And maybe a lot of you can relate to this as well. Whatever it is you're doing for your job or career, at least right now, maybe isn't aligned with who you actually are. Maybe it's just the vehicle to live your life, but you know that people are putting you in a certain box and judging you based on your response. But our job is not who we are, especially for those of us who are early on in our careers and maybe still figuring out what we want to do long-term in our career. Our job might literally just be something we do to afford our life. It's a vehicle to live our life, and that is 100% okay. But all the more reason why we shouldn't be labeling others by this metric. So that's number one, job career. Number two, relationship status. Another question that we seem to jump to in conversation with people is, oh, are you seeing anyone? Are you dating? Are you single? For some reason, we like to use this as another way to label people and judge people. I think a lot of us immediately jump to the conclusion that if you're in a relationship, you go out less, you spend most of your time with your partner, maybe your life's a bit slower, or if you're single, you're going out, you're having more fun, it's your single phase of life, you're independent, you're a free bird. And another thing that we like to do is project this negative judgment onto people that are single. We've all gotten at one point or another that reaction from people if we share that we're single, like, oh, it's okay, you'll find someone soon. Like, oh, don't worry, like you'll meet them at the right time. It's like, yeah, I wasn't worried. Thank you though for assuming that it was a negative thing. It's like society has kind of told us that being single in a certain way means that we're lonely or it's something to like be ashamed of. So another great example of people making assumptions and projecting labels simply from a relationship status. But a relationship is simply who we choose to spend our time with and be romantic with. It has nothing to do with who we are, right? If we're currently single or in a relationship, it doesn't mean anything about our character. It's not a good or a bad thing. And we should absolutely not be projecting labels or defining people based on a relationship status. A few other ways that I find a lot of people define others: where they grew up or where they live, how social they are on the weekends, their friends, their social circles, what sports team they support, a hobby they enjoy, the car they drive, the clothes they wear, designer brands, the music they like. The list can honestly go on and on. And maybe there's a few that's specific to you that are top of mind at this moment. But these are a lot of ones that I think we can relate to. So now let's take a step back and ask why we define and label each other based off of these things. Because the fact of the matter is, none of these surface level qualities that we label and judge each other by really encompass who we are at all. So why do we do it? I think two things are at play here. When we're able to put someone in a box or categorize them in some way, there's less uncertainty that we now feel is associated with that person. When we are able to cling to a certain label, we can more easily define them as, quote, good or bad. It's a lot easier for us to have an opinion on something when we feel like we know them better. So, by being able to attach a definition or label, even if it's an incorrect definition or label, it's easier for us to have an opinion about it. It's easier for us to group them into a bucket to say, oh, that's good or bad, or oh, that's how I feel now about that career or that person or whatever. The more we're able to define someone or something in this way, the more black and white it makes it. It removes some of the variability or the gray area. So by projecting these labels and grouping people in our lives into these buckets, we are removing some of the uncertainty. It allows us to establish opinions with more ease. And in a weird way, this makes us feel safer. We feel like we know that person a little bit better, right? Or we're a little bit more familiar with this situation. There's less uncertainty associated there. So we think that by knowing someone's job or relationship status or what neighborhood that they live in, that we know all about them because we're like, oh, we can put them in that bucket now or that box. So we're going to have them in the relationship box, or we're going to have them in the finance box. We can put some in the single or not, wealthy or not, corporate or creative, et cetera, et cetera. Again, the list goes on and on. And this leads me to the second point, which I think is a big reason that leads us to projecting these labels and defining people in this way, are predetermined biases from society. So once we put someone in this box based on some response that they gave us, thanks to society, we now have all sorts of predetermined ideas and biases that we can now project onto this person or situation. Literally about everything. Society has molded us to believe certain truths about what's good or bad and to believe in this certain hierarchy in life. So when we hear someone's responses, we immediately find ourselves projecting these biases onto them, whether we realize it or not. They're just thoughts that come up in our head, and it's really hard to not project these biases onto them. And this could be either from society making us believe a certain way about a certain characteristic, or maybe it's a previous experience that we've had personally that now urges us to project a certain label or judgment onto that person or situation. Let's say someone tells you they're a banker. You immediately think of the stereotypical guy in a suit with slicked back hair, holding a briefcase, stuck in a corporate hamster wheel, works all the time, yada, yada, or whatever your perception of a banker is. You put them in the banker bucket. And society's kind of told us what to believe about someone with that job, which is crazy because, again, we're not our jobs, but we attach this label to a person. And all of a sudden, we think we know all about them because they told us they're a banker. when literally they might be interested in music and art and poetry. But would we know that from putting them in this bucket and projecting our biases? Definitely not. Society also likes to tell us that certain jobs might equal a certain level of success in life. So, sure, maybe like a banker earns a high income. So, immediately you group that person into the successful bucket. But as I've discussed in another episode, I wholeheartedly believe that success is not measured by how much money we make or how many hours we work. And the episode I'm referring to is the episode all about what success actually means and what it doesn't mean. So I'm going to link that in the show notes if you're interested in that topic. It's one of my favorite ones. I think it's really, really interesting. So feel free to listen if you choose. I will link it. But again, what someone does doesn't determine their success. It's simply a job. So why do we project this label onto this person? It's because of society, and it's because we feel that there's less uncertainty associated with them. So although that we think that projecting these definitions and labels from these shallow characteristics of our lives means that we immediately know someone or something better, we don't. These are simply assumptions and projections of our predetermined biases or of our opinions. We don't actually know that person any better, but we just choose to label them. And this leads us to preventing ourselves from actually wanting to get to know the person on a deeper level because we just assume that these more shallow characteristics define who they are. So, coming to the thesis of the episode here, by labeling and defining from these shallow characteristics, we think that we know the person better and we think we're more certain about who they are. But really, we're actually limiting our perspectives and closing our minds. Okay, why? As human beings, we are extremely complex. Our lives are complex. Who we are at our core is complex. We are so much more than our jobs, our relationship status, our neighborhood, our income, our hobbies, our friends, our music taste. These traits and things that we're using to define ourselves by and label others by doesn't really have anything to do with who we are at our core. They're often what we're doing in our lives or how we spend our time or our preferences, but it's not who we are. But we like to assume who someone is based off of these things. So by using these labels and preconceived judgments, we're limiting the depth that we allow to see in others. We kind of just put them in this surface level bucket, and because we think we know them from that, we refuse to look deeper. And I think we do this with others and in ourselves. So since we've placed someone in a bucket or a box with this label, we assume we have them all figured out, but we really don't know them at all. What came to mind here is if you're on a first date with someone, they're telling you all these things about themselves. It's so easy for us to judge that person based on their responses, based on all the traits I've listed before. But you barely get to know someone on a first date. Sure, you know these traits about what they do for a living, where they live, where they're from, where they went to college, but you don't know who they are at their core at all. You simply know these facts about someone. So that's just a good example of an instance where you don't actually know someone, but you think you can judge someone based on a first date. You don't get to know someone until like what, date 10 plus? Anyways, I digress. So another reason that clinging to these labels and definitions is limiting us is because they can be impacting the direction that we choose to take our lives and what we choose to pursue. So for example, since society has told us that a lot of these traits are, quote, good or bad, and we know that a lot of people will associate that good or bad label with certain paths we choose to take in life, we might consciously or subconsciously choose that direction simply because of this. Because of our fear of others labeling us and the way that we label ourselves and our choices in life, we might choose to take a certain path that we really feel misaligned with simply because we want to be labeled a certain way or we don't want to be mislabeled. At the end of the day, we just want to be accepted by society and others, right? We want to be loved and we want to feel love. And I think a lot of us think that if we choose a certain path in life, the one that's accepted by others, that's labeled in a quote, good way, that we will be accepted and loved by others. So we might deep down know something that we love or that we're passionate about, but we don't do it because maybe we're fearful of being associated with a certain definition or label. So we might pursue a job we don't like. We might stay in a relationship we're not happy with because we don't want to be labeled as single or lonely. Or we might buy a certain car or designer product just to be perceived a certain way by others. Or maybe we perceive ourselves that way. So you know where I'm getting at here. By falling prey to believing these labels, we let them control our lives. And again, it prevents us from seeing others on a deeper level and getting to know others for who they truly are. So I think this is a big cause of anxiety and lack of satisfaction and unfulfillment that we're all feeling, because we're on this mission to externally define ourselves when these are not the things that we should be defining ourselves by. And this is not actually who we are. So by chasing these external ways to, quote, prove ourselves in society and make others like us, that's not going to be the path to feeling actually fulfilled in life and actually finding ourselves or following a path that's going to bring us joy and true success and happiness. If we pursue the path simply because we think others are going to think highly of it, or we're going to be labeled a certain way, but that's not actually aligned with who we are, or not one that we're actually excited about, is that the life you really want to be living? And it all comes down to this idea that we're giving into these labels and shallow definitions of how we define others and define ourselves, which is why we must start letting go of defining each other and ourselves by these labels, by these surface level qualities. So if we're not defining ourselves by these things, who are we? How should we define ourselves or define others? Here's the thing. We don't need to define ourselves. We are worthy just as we are, and we don't have to prove ourselves to either us or anyone else. We don't need to prove ourselves with a certain degree, job, relationship status, fancy car or apartment, or designer clothes. We don't need to do this. We don't need to break our backs to try to be perceived a certain way because we're just worried of how others will feel about these things. At the end of the day, people are probably going to project labels and judgments, but we can recognize that as human beings, we're far more complex than all these things. We're far more interesting. We're ever evolving than these shallow traits or facts about our lives can really reveal about ourselves. So what if we remind ourselves that this is not who we are and how we want to be perceived? And when we recognize that we're not these things, it's easier to remind ourselves that others aren't these qualities as well. They're far deeper than all the labels that we like to project onto them. They're far deeper, more complex, more interesting than these labels. And so are you. Every single one of us is. So just like you deserve to be considered far beyond these labels and not judged for these labels or definitions, get curious about others on a deeper level. Remember that every single one of us is so much more complex and interesting and unique. And once we stop judging ourselves for these labels, we can stop projecting them onto others as well. So sure, maybe continue asking these questions at a bar just to get to know someone, but remember that is not who they are, and it's not who you are as well. So when we let go of trying to define by these more shallow traits, maybe some more important questions to ask are we happy? Are we enjoying and learning and experiencing all that life has to offer? Are we surrounding ourselves with people we love and doing what lights us up? Are we seeing improvement and growth in life? Are we being a person that we're proud of and showing up genuinely for ourselves and for our relationships? Again, I talk about this in the success episode that is linked as well. So to conclude, let go of letting these labels limit you. Remember that you and every single person are so much deeper and more interesting than these simple labels that we choose to define ourselves and each other by. Once we let go of the labels, we can set ourselves and others free, and we might open our eyes to so many more amazing and unique qualities that someone has to offer and that you have to offer. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Unfulfilled. Really excited about this topic. Would love to hear your thoughts. Please send this to someone in your life who you think might need to hear this message. And again, press follow or subscribe wherever you are listening. Would mean the world to me. Thank you again for showing up today for yourself. And I'll see you all again soon on your journey to becoming more fulfilled.